education level. You don't have to have any work experience per se. You don't have to have experience as a manager, an executive. You could have no business experience for that matter.
There is no amount that is determined by law, but the amount must be substantial. If it's the amount should be no less than $100,000 as of right now.
Statistically speaking, your chances are better in the U.S. than at the embassy.
They want to trace the actual path that you earned, accumulated over a certain time, and then transfer the funds to the United States.
But believe me, once after you get that initial approval, I don't think anybody's going to look at that business plan unless the client wants to read it. Good afternoon, everybody. What's a step-by-step process to effectively and quickly receiving an E-2 visa? And what are the issues that can come up along the way that you need to be careful of to ensure a safe and successful petition and making your transition to the U.S. as successful as possible? Today, we're going to go through all of these issues, and I've invited my colleague, Asmina Symonyan, who heads up our E-2 department, to help me work through all these issues with you in discussing how to effectively build out a good E-2 strategy from start to finish. Asmina, thanks for joining us today.
Good afternoon, Charles. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me here. Yeah, I would love to talk about E-2s.
All right, and all those great things involving E-2s. Now, we've done a lot of other videos on E-2s, so we're not going to discuss all these other issues, including like some of the most common mistakes that people make with doing an E-2, and we can maybe include the link to that video below in the description. And we've also discussed in more detail even how to nail an E-2 interview and some other things. But today's discussion, we kind of wanted to go through the general strategy as to, what are all the major milestones you need to keep in mind when preparing an effective E-2 petition. So without further ado, why don't we get started? We'll kind of go through the main blocks here, and then, talk about within each block some, additional information and supporting issues that might be related to that particular issue. So the first one is, who is the E-2, relevant for, good for, and what is required? And I can answer this question. I would say the E-2 is a super popular visa, very popular. I would say it's, one of the top two visas we have with our practice in terms of number of applicants. And I would say it's most appealing to those who want to make a relatively quick transition to the U.S. They're not necessarily concerned about getting a green card right now. They may have plans to do so in the future, but they maybe just want to get here faster and don't want to wait for the green card. Or they might want to just come to the U.S. for a while with a family, live and work here for a bit, see how things work out. And if they really like it, then at that point, they'll make plans for future residency here in the U.S. The good thing about the E-2 is it's very flexible in terms of who can apply. You don't have to have a specific education level. You don't have to have any work experience per se. You don't have to have experience as a manager, an executive. You could have no business experience for that matter. And like I said, it's quite fast in terms of getting all the documentation, getting the interview. And the other flexible thing or positive thing is the vast majority of business types would qualify. In some of our other videos, we talk about some of these issues. If you have a passive business, or if you have a business that, it's hard for you, there's no capital investments that are required. There's just no way for you to spend, say, $100,000. That could be an issue. But otherwise, the vast majority of businesses do qualify for an E-2, provided that is the path you want to take. So that's kind of like who the ideal avatar client is, who's looking for it. I would say it's generally somebody who's open to opening a business or maybe buying a business. They want to get here relatively quickly. And they don't necessarily have $800,000 to invest in an EB-5. You only have to invest about $100,000. So that's the ideal, client, I would say, for an E-2. What would be the next item to think about, Asmina?
In order to determine eligibility, you need to know that E-2 is basically a visa based on a treaty between the United States and third country. And you need to understand, there is a link, probably we can provide it here along with this video so that you can check your eligibility. There is a list of countries that has that treaty with the United States. And if an applicant has citizenship of a country that has a treaty, it makes him or her eligible for an E-2. List of countries includes most of Western European countries, some Eastern European countries. I don't remember by heart the total number of countries participating in the program, but I believe maybe it's around probably close to 100.
100, yeah, I think it's about 100. Yeah. So you're right. The majority of companies have a corresponding treaty with the U.S. Some of the biggest countries that do not have an E-2 treaty are China, India, Russia. Those are at least the first that come to mind that are big countries. So those countries do not have an E-2 treaty. Now, if you have a second citizenship besides your original one, that works. And for example, we have a lot of people, maybe they might be of Indian origin, but they're Canadian citizens. They can use their Canadian passport, for example, to do an E-2.
Yeah, exactly.
So what I was going to ask the next question is, so if assuming then they have the corresponding passport, what is the best option from your experience in terms of business? Is it better to open a new business or buy an existing one?
It actually depends what the client wants. If the client is 100% sure about the business model, maybe that business, he or she was operating that business in their country of citizenship or origin, and they're familiar with the business, they want to start the exact same one, that's okay and pretty safe to start own business. But when it comes to someone trying to relocate to the United States and start a whole new life and start some new business, it might be probably easier to purchase an existing business or sometimes even purchase a franchise, because it somehow supports you along the process, especially during the initial stages. If you're not familiar with the business, with the area, apparently doing business in the United States is different from doing business anywhere else. It's obvious. So sometimes this administrative and technical support at early stages is really helpful. But some of our clients, we're seeing some of our clients being pretty confident and being businessmen, entrepreneurs for years, and they feel pretty good about establishing their own businesses and running their own businesses. In terms of approval, I don't see a big difference. Charles, maybe you have any other thoughts on that? But
yeah, I don't think there's a big difference. I think generally, as a general rule, if you have an operating business already, it reduces the risk factors in the eyes of the officer. Hey, is this business going to take off? Is this for real? So theoretically, I guess if you have an operating business, your chances are a little better. But I agree with you, Asmina, that the reality is the majority of our clients open a business from scratch, and the vast majority of these clients get approvals. So I can't say, that there's a big difference. I mean, if the client is opening their own business and it doesn't have any revenue, that's okay, as long as you meet all the other criteria, dot your T's or dot your I's, cross your T's to make sure you meet all the other requirements. And of course, that's our job to make sure you do that. Yes, I don't think there's really much of a difference between opening a new business or buying an existing one. The one thing I might just add is this is a tiny little note, but could be of value. The only benefit may be, or I shouldn't say it's a little benefit, it could be a large benefit of purchasing a business. Again, you have to purchase a controlling stake in the business, is if you have an agreement with the seller, and especially if the seller is a friend of yours or maybe a relative, or I don't know, that if you have an agreement that, if you don't get the visa, you can sell back your share of the business to that person. That's a great kind of insurance policy to protect you in the event of, God forbid, if you do get a denial, that it's relatively easy to unwind the transaction. You sell back your share of the business and you go your own ways. Whereas if you're opening a new business, you're getting a new lease agreement, you're buying equipment, all those other things. And in the unlikely chance or the unlikely event you get a denial, it's much more difficult than to, dispose of those assets or sell them or other things. So maybe that's the one case where I would say buying a business might be a little bit better in the event, you get a denial.
And what do you think about using maybe escrow agents or escrow attorneys when purchasing a business? Is it feasible? Does it make the application weaker or?
That's a good question. So Well, if you're purchasing a business, again, if it's a third party purchase, you don't know the other party. I think it's inevitable to use an escrow attorney just to protect all sides. Again, if you trust the other side, you know them, their partner, friend, there's no need to necessarily get an escrow attorney involved. But let's say you found somebody online, you want to buy their business. Yeah, you do probably want to have an escrow attorney involved just to make sure, they're holding the money and they don't release the money until you get what you need, your rights to the company. So that's how I see it. In that regard. But if you can get by without getting an escrow attorney, why bear the expense? I would say.
Yeah, I'm asking because sometimes clients do ask, what if we just put money in the escrow and apply for the visa, and the escrow money, the release of money will be contingent upon.
I see. That's where you're going with that question. Okay, yes. Yes, so that does happen sometimes where people that, like you just mentioned, the sale is contingent upon the getting the visa. I don't think that happens too much because the vast majority of sellers want to they just want to sell the business. They don't want to have to be dependent upon the buyer successfully getting their visa. But in those cases where it happens, as long as you structure it correctly and you have an escrow agreement that's written in the right way for the E-2 visa, yeah, it should work. And that's something we would help a client with, to make sure that the escrow agreement is properly prepared. The main consideration to keep in mind is that the escrow agreement makes it very clear. If you get it's not the green card, if you get the visa, there is no, way back, changing your mind, mulligan, whatever. No, you got to go forward with it. So you get the visa, boom, the seller automatically gets his or her money. And that's the main provision to have in the escrow agreement. So it's doable. It doesn't happen too much, but it's doable, I think. So how much, what's the next item? So let's say you figured out you want to buy a business or you want to open a new business. How much money do they have to put into that?
There is no amount that is determined by law, but the amount must be substantial. So based on our experience and experience of many other lawyers and how the officers view the substantiality from their perspective, it's the amount should be no less than $100,000 as of right now. So our suggestion is to invest no less than $100,000 because most startups do require this amount to start operations, and this amount will be viewed as substantial and will meet the substantiality test.
Right. People sometimes say, can I invest less money? Sure, you can invest as little as you want. I mean, but with each dollar that you invest less, you're probably raising the chances of getting a denial. I mean, it's not a one-for-one correlation, but if you're investing anything below 80,000, I would say your risk is quite high that you might get a denial, because at that point, if you're below 80,000 investment level, they're going to say, hey, this looks like a hobby or something. This isn't a real business. They could even ask that question at the level of 100,000. But as Asmina mentioned, in our years of doing this, I don't think we've ever had anybody challenge when we were investing about 100,000 or more. So that's usually what we tell our clients to do. Now, related to this is, it doesn't just mean you wire 100,000 to your bank account of your company and you're off to go file your petition. You actually have to spend the majority of that funds. So if you invest 100K, we always tell clients you got to spend probably 60,000 at least, maybe a little bit more, before you file, because they want to see that those funds are actually used and have been used for the business, and it's not just you're keeping the 100,000 there until you get your visa and you take that, put it back in your pocket as soon as you come here. So you've got to actually spend and commit those funds. Here's something that comes up a lot, Asmina. I think people say, okay, what can I spend the money on? Or how do we do it if they're in a service business? And that comes up a lot of times to say, well, I don't have a lot of stuff to spend on. I just need a laptop and a couple desks and some other stuff.
Yeah, good question. It can be challenging, especially some businesses may really require no more than $30,000 to set them up and start the operations. But unfortunately, that's won't get you an E-2 visa. In order to secure one, you got to spend approximately $60,000 to $70,000 out of 100,000 invested funds. So, speaking of expenses, what could that be? Apparently, paying for your office rent is a good thing. You can buy certain equipment. Even if you provide services in certain area, you might need certain equipment, maybe laptops, printers, office furniture. You can purchase that. Also, you can enter into certain agreements because you need to advertise your services in order to attract clients. You may hire some marketing agency, and prepay their services. For example, you may pay for certain advertisement. You may develop a website and you may pay for that service. You may do maybe, I don't know, optimization, search engine optimization or something else so that your website attracts more people. You don't have to hire any contractors or W-2 employees, but you can if it's feasible at that stage, for example. What else could that be?
Well, here's something that comes up too. Sorry for interrupting. Yeah, I think a lot of everything that you mentioned is all relevant. And here's the one thing too that people aren't always clear about. So, in addition to all those types of expenditures you talked about, here's the one thing: they don't have to be made in the U.S. And sometimes clients aren't clear about that. They're like, okay, I got to hire a marketing company in the U.S. You don't necessarily have to, right? You could hire a marketing company in Europe or Canada or something. Or like you said, develop some software. And that's something that's come up a lot of times. Like, people had some kind of, they're in the service business, IT business, and maybe they needed some software that they're going to start using or marketing to clients and stuff like that. Well, yeah, you can pay for the development of that. And the developers might all be overseas. So the money comes into the U.S. company, but the U.S. company then pays maybe the offshore developers, the offshore marketing companies, stuff like that. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point to mention.
Yeah. So let's see we've determined whether we're a citizen of a corresponding country. We've decided what kind of business we're going to do. We've decided how much we've invested or will invest and how we're going to spend that money. I guess the next big question is source of funds, right? So the money that you invest in the business and you spend, we have to show the path and the source of funds. Maybe you can give a few thoughts about that, how we do that, Asmina.
Yeah, absolutely. So to prove the source and passive funds, we definitely need to collect documentation to support all the statements claiming that the money came from certain source. There are different types of proving the funds depending on the source. You may earn some employment income over the years. You may get you may sell your property, for example, real estate or any other property. You may get a gift from close relatives, friends, even get a loan from a financial institution. Clients always, frequently ask if it's a good thing to probably get a loan from a bank and then invest the money in the U.S. business. The answer is yes, it is, in case it's a personal loan and there is no collateral in the form of the actual investment or the U.S. business itself. In case you're just getting your personal loan, you can definitely proceed with that and use the funds for your E-2 investment.
That's a good point. Yeah, I'll just add to that yes, you can use credit, loans, other sources of funds. So, clients sometimes will say, gosh, I just don't have that $100,000. But, they can go to their relatives. They can go to a banking institution. What's common with a lot of Canadian clients is they'll get a HELOC, a line of credit, against their equity in their house, given how steeply real estate values have appreciated over the last couple of years in Canada, especially in the Toronto area. And so they can use that money to pull it out and put in the business.
With the source of funds, also, we have to, clients, they have to be able to prove not only the source. For example, let's say providing tax returns themselves aren't enough. Just showing that you've earned certain amount of money over a certain period of time is not enough, because they want to trace the actual past that you earned, accumulated over certain time, and then transfer the funds to the United States. There is no standard list of documents because every situation is unique, and you got to prepare and brainstorm a list of documents sufficient for each particular situation to provide evidentiary support and evidence and documents to establish the actual source and path of these funds.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's one important phase, and generally we're able to do that without too big of problems. So then, assuming that the client has invested their funds, they can prove where they got the funds from. The next question that comes up is usually where and how should I file? And there's two ways to file for an E-2. You can file in the U.S. if you have some other visa that you entered and stayed here on. Usually it's a tourist visa, maybe a student visa, or you can file at a consulate. And clients always say, where's the best way to go? And there's no right answer that fits everybody. It really depends on the client. I would say in general, the default is probably it's better to file at the consulate. It's generally a little bit faster there, even though there could be long wait times at the consulates. And sometimes at some places, it could be really long wait. I mean, we had a client who had to wait more than a year. It was crazy. But generally, it's not that long. I'd say on average, it's maybe a couple months that you have to wait for the interview. But the reason why we say that filing at the embassy is generally better is because you receive an actual visa, and that visa allows you to travel in and out of the U.S. If you're in the U.S. and you change your status from, say, tourist status to an E-2 status, you don't receive a visa. There's no such thing as receiving a visa on the territory of the U.S. And so what happens is you get a status for 2 years, and you can stay in the U.S. for 2 years. But as soon as you leave the U.S., maybe in 6 months you want to go home and visit some people, your status expires. It gets canceled as soon as you leave the U.S. And then you'll still have to go to the embassy, go through the rigmarole, file all the documents again. And at the embassy, they want the documents in a different format and different types of forms than in the U.S. So it's just more of a headache. Now, there could be cases where we just might recommend to the client do change of status in the U.S., despite these benefits of going to the embassy. What are those situations where we might say, look, just do it in the U.S.? If the client had some prior issues at a consulate, meaning primarily if there were some denials, that's a little bit of a red flag that it's going to heighten the chance of a denial for your E-2. That's one reason we might want to try to avoid a consulate. The other thing is, depending on where the client's from or where they physically could go to the interview, if they're in a country or able to only go to an embassy in a country that has a high denial rate, we might say, look, it's not worth risking it. It's better to go to the U.S. and file there. Another reason could be if we feel the client's English skills are so poor and they don't speak the local language that the interview might not go well. Some embassies allow you to bring a translator in, some don't. Every embassy, of course, is ready to have an interview in English, but let's say your English is pretty poor, and let's assume you wanted to go to an embassy in a country that's not your native country. You don't speak the native language. So if you don't speak the native language, you don't speak English too well, and they don't allow translators, you don't have a lot of options at that point. So, or even if you do speak the language or English or the local language, but you're really nervous during interviews. You get really nervous. You're not able to explain things. And sometimes we've had clients like that. They just don't have that kind of experience, or they just have, bad nerves that could create problems at the interview. That also might be a situation when we would recommend changing status in the U.S. So there's no one size fit all. And I should maybe add one last thing is the overall statistics. Statistically speaking, your chances are better in the U.S. than at the embassy. That's a very broad generalization, but statistically, you're better in the U.S. But despite that fact, despite that the general stats favor change of status in the U.S., we still think generally it's better to go to the embassy unless you're kind of in one of these high-risk categories. Was there anything else you might want to add to that, Asmina?
I would probably add, it doesn't apply to all people, probably more to Eastern European clients, but if a client has certain challenges establishing ties to the country of their citizenship, because we are seeing it, major reason of denials in the embassies in Eastern Europe, for example, we would also recommend, in case that client has a non-immigrant visa to stay on in the United States, we would probably recommend doing a change of status.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. So depending on your nationality too, they might be more likely to suspect you have immigrant intent, and that might affect your ability to successfully pass the interview. So that's a good point too. A lot of times people ask questions, what do they ask about at the interview? And we have some other videos that talk about that. So I'm probably not going to go into a lot of that today, but we can say a few words that the one thing to keep in mind, I tell clients, is be ready to sell yourself and your business, right? You're kind of like promoting your business in front of somebody, telling them why it's a great business and you're going to make money and benefit the U.S. economy and stuff like that. I mean, you don't need to get into superlatives about saying, hey, I got the best ice cream shop in, California. But it's always good to be able to show them you have a good handle on the business, on the numbers, on the estimates that you have for the company's growth, because they're going to look at the business plan, especially at the embassy. They'll look at the business plan. And if you're able to reflect what's in the business plan, say, hey, we're planning to reach this benchmark this year and hire this many people and have this much in revenue, that shows that you're really tuned into the business. You know what you're doing, you're focused on it, and you should be able to successfully develop it. So I would say that that's an important part of the interview, to create a good impression and to show that you know your business. What other things that they might ask? It really depends on the officer. They might say, hey, why did you choose this business? Do you have any experience? And they might be asking that to see how successful you'll be at managing the business. Some other questions. And if you've had some problems in the past, you've had some denials or some other issues, quite possible they'll bring those up during the interview as well. Anything else then? I mean, if that's, we've brought the client through this whole process and hopefully they successfully pass the interview, they get their visa at that point, Asmina. Is there anything else that they should have in mind? Or maybe what are a few things to keep in mind so that when they go to extend their visa, the process is a little bit easier?
Yeah. So basically, once your visa is secured, it's going to be secured. It depends. Status is going to be given for 2 years if you're applying for a change of status in the United States. If you're going through a consular processing, it's going to be somewhere from 3 months to 5 years, depending on the country of your citizenship and the terms of the treaty between the country of your citizenship and the United States. So, but after the expiration of your visa or status term, you may be eligible for renewing your visa or extending your status if you satisfy the requirements for that renewal, which is I believe a little less complicated than the initial application, because you don't have to establish any source and passive investment, but you'd merely focus on your business profitability, non-marginability. This is a term that the USCIS uses, so that you can show that the business is growing and it can support not only the living of the main applicant's family and the main applicant himself, for example.
Right. Yeah, there's no minimum, like how much you need to make every year to support your family and stuff. And I think generally they don't get too much into that. I mean, they don't say, hey, how much do you spend on food, groceries each month, and start challenging you on that. But you want to show that you're making, we tell clients at least, $35,000 a year, although that's probably too low of a figure. I just know in the past, sometimes we've had problems when clients had less than that. Sometimes the service would ask questions about it, but there's no minimum amount. And generally, if you can show the business is, making a decent amount of money, and even if it's not, let's say the business had, first 2 years were great, then things went down for the last year or two. Now you're there to renew it. If you can even show that, hey, yeah, we've had a bad year, we lost money even last year, but you can show some things that are helping to turn the business around, some new contracts, some new clients. Maybe you didn't get money from them yet, but in the future, near future, next 3-6 months, you should. They're generally pretty liberal in taking that into account and giving you the benefit of the doubt, I would say.
Yeah. Probably the only thing I want to add here is the business plan that is submitted with the initial application. And many clients are really concerned about not meeting the figures mentioned on the plan and meeting the anticipated number of employees by the time they have to renew their application. So is it that crucial, Charles, to probably hire 2 people instead of promise 3, or making a little less than you initially promised when file your application?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I hate to say it because our clients pay, a fair amount of money for these business plans. But believe me, once after you get that initial approval, I don't think anybody's going to look at that business plan unless the client wants to read it. So you're pretty safe if you anticipated hiring 5 people, you only hired 3. You anticipated 75,000 in, net profits, and you only got 45,000. That's generally not an issue. At least it's not an issue from the sense that they're not going to compare what your estimates were and hold you accountable for that. I mean, if your actual revenue or performance indicators are so bad that they're thinking, gee, this is really not a good business, yes, that could affect you. But no one's going to go back and look at your business plan to, double check your figures and your numbers. So that's a good point as well. So hopefully this helps lay out the major milestones and markers in the E-2 process for everybody. There's obviously more details and nuances than we've got into today during our discussion, but hopefully this gives you a good flavor of what's required for the E-2 and a good understanding of whether this is something you think realistically you could do for yourself and your family. And if it is something that you think is doable, feel free to reach out to us, and Asmina, myself, and the rest of our team would be more than happy to work with you, whether it's an E-2 or another option, but to work with you, develop an effective strategy to help you make that transition to the U.S. as comfortably and conveniently as possible for yourself and your family. Thanks again for your time and attention. Thank you, Asmina, for your time as well.
Thank you very much, Charles, for having me here.
Absolutely. And so if you're interested in the E-2, please reach out to us to set up an interview or a consultation with us where we can go into more details. You can leave any comments below as well, and feel free to sign up for our YouTube channel to get all the latest news on E-2 and other U.S. visa options. Thanks once again.
Thanks, everybody. We'll be happy to help.